On the top left and over and down one, those are convention minutes, list of delegates, just various convention stuff. You can find some neat stuff in those. Then you get over like into, the second one down on the second grouping, and the third, you get into general correspondence, and you can find things in there, just general correspondence. For example, Mark Irish letter resigning as AA will be in there. A letter from a guy who basically got Robert Todd Lincoln to agree to have his name added to our rolls, though he didn't want to be put through an initiation. He said he's joined too many clubs already, and he doesn't care. And that letter is in there, so great. But then over here, you have PR farms. And then they go all down here, and then they're down in the basement, and they're just expanding. Yeah, we just keep getting more PR farms. But it's neat to look and find Kevin Costner's PR farm. Ashton Kutcher. As I said before, we're missing, we believe, book number 2, which has, we believe, Benjamin Harrison, president, Charles Fairbanks, vice president, no telling, a few hundred other people in the early years, probably some other important people. Now, down below there, those are books by or about Delta Chi's, mainly by Delta Chi's, like James Stewart, Den of Thieves. I forget what other famous book he wrote. He wrote a few. And then Robert Newton Peck, who wrote children's books. Richard Peck, who wrote books for adolescents. He's got a bunch in there. I forget who else is down there. We've done a very poor job over the years of collecting books written by Delta Chi's or about Delta Chi's. We really should have someone do something about that. I made an effort myself and added several, but that's what we have. Phi Delta has like an entire wall of books by or about Phi Deltas. And we have a small collection. I'm sorry about that. I'm looking for, and I think I found it, the earliest preamble. There it is. I don't know if you want to shoot it.
The glare will be pretty tough, Ray, if you want to read it.
I'll read it.
Yeah, thank you, sir.
Preamble, Constitution. This is George Null's handwriting, and he would have written this, in my opinion, in the spring of 1894. Why do I say that? Well, I believe what he was doing was taking the records that he had and transcribing them. In fact, I think he transcribed them into 4 black books. And this one, and you can look at the numbers on the top right and get a sense of it. This has the Constitution, as it was in 1894, preamble. In order to receive the advantages of an association organized for mutual assistance in the acquiring of a sound and finished legal education, the Delta Chi fraternity does ordain and establish the following constitution. So, as I emphasized, legal, and it just basically said, it's for a law fraternity, or a legal fraternity, as they called themselves at that time. Not like the preamble today, which I believe was written by O.K. Patton circa 1922. Just amazing. Then we have the minutes that go beyond. We have the original, the 1894 ritual. This says, this ritual adopted 1891. Originally, when they initiated guys, the guys that were initiated would sign in on the bottom of the ritual. Well, they transcribed that ritual and then threw it away. Great. You bums. Let's see if I can find something that I'm looking for here. Secretary's Journal. April 15th, 1891. This is important because on April 14th of 1891, John Francis Tucker from NYU came up to look into this new law fraternity that he had heard about and to see if he could start a second chapter at NYU. He did that on April 14th. They initiated him that night, sent him home to apply to petition to our ancient and honorable body, that's Albert T. Wilkinson's words, to get a chapter granted at NYU. So the next night on April 15th, they hold a meeting to form that ancient and honorable body for him to apply to. Now, running for, this is really ironic given what we talked about earlier, the following nominations were made. President, Owen Lincoln Potter. Why am I hesitating? The 9 founders in that photo excluded Potter, and he was the AA. Well, he was president. AA as a term, as a title, did not exist yet. Who ran against him? It's an easy guess. Sweetland. Vice President, J.M. Gorham. Secretary, Albert Sollard Barnes and George A. Knoll. Treasurer, Albert T. Wilkins. And of course, Potter, Gorham, Knoll, and Wilkinson were elected. But on that 9-man founder composite that Whitney had sent to the chapter, he had left out Potter and who was the other? Watkins. That's crazy.
Who ran against the other people? Does it state?
Yeah, well, I read who. Sweetland ran against Potter. Gorham ran unopposed. Barnes ran against Knoll. And Wilkinson ran unopposed. So, now I've shown you the most cherished secret, which we can't talk about here. Did I talk about the flat forehead syndrome to you?
You have, but I think you should tell it again.
Well, they had, the most cherished secret was long, and they had a meaning for it. And then there's a space that says it was then moved and carried that the motto be contracted into the following form, 2 words, which we now use, meaning what we now believe. Now the question is, why? And I call it a flat forehead syndrome. That's when you go, wait a second, slap yourself in the forehead. If we shorten it to 2 words, what does it do? It has 2 words that start with delta chi. Delta in the first word, chi in the second. The name of the fraternity. So ironically, our most cherished secret, what we keep, we're not supposed to say outside of the courtroom, all that other stuff, is we wear on our athletic jerseys on intramural fields. It's the name of the fraternity. I think that is fabulous. Holy cow. If you just read the minutes, it's amazing what you can understand. They had 5 words before that. So here's all the minutes, Minnesota and Michigan getting chartered. They voted them in, but Minnesota wasn't, which one wasn't ready yet?
Michigan, they came in.
Michigan wasn't ready yet. They were voted in first, but they weren't ready, so Minnesota got brought in first. And then, if I can find it, Carl Peterson in the 30s started sending questionnaires to the founders. And it's interesting to read Sweetland, and you understand why I said he has an ego. I can't get this open now, but he basically, to everything, who conceived the idea of Delta Chi? Monroe Marsh Sweetland, and he was the only one. Where was it conceived? During the year 89-90, I was taking postgraduate work at Cornell and saw the opportunity for another fraternity. When was the first meeting held? In the law office of Monroe Marsh Sweetland. Who attended the first organization? Thomas Sullivan and Thomas David Watkins. Where was the meeting held? Sweetland's office. Original objective, was it actually organized in June of 90? Yes, Sweetland had been working on it. Just Sweetland. It just keeps going. Did you know Crandall? Yes. Did you know Thomas? Yeah. What part did they play? Almost none. Who drafted the Constitution and bylaws? Stillman, Watkins, Sullivan, Barnes, and Sweetland. Who conceived the ritual and secret work? Mostly the work of Stillman and Sweetland. Who designed the fraternity pin? Monroe Marsh Sweetland. Did you know George Hoxie? Yes. Well, it goes on. Find that interesting.
What were the purpose of those questionnaires?
Well, Carl Peterson had discovered one way or another Myron McKee Crandall, and Frank, help me,
Thomas.
Thomas. And he thought they were involved in the founding. And so he asked all the founders to fill out these same, every founder filled out this, was asked to fill out the same questionnaire. And basically, when it was all said and done, the thing to look at is right here. If you can look at it, if you can shoot this page. Okay, now I'll read it to you. What it says is, on October 13th, 1890, it lists as active charter members Barnes, Crandall, Gorham, O'Malley, Potter, Stillman, Sullivan, Sweetland, Watkins, and Whitney. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Missing is Peter Sherman Johnson. Below those 10 is a squiggly, and then Frank Edward Thomas listed on October 13th as honorary. Now, because of that, he's not listed as a founder. Then on November 26, Frank Bowman, George Wilcox, Albert T. Wilkinson were all initiated. Albert T. Wrote several letters in response to Peterson and someone else, Whitney, explaining his memory of the early years, and he's probably the best source of information. When you read his writing, you know, he is very lucid about things. And he said he was the first initiate. Also, he said he was the individual who introduced Kimball to the fraternity. Now that's interesting because chapters have this propensity, or let me say, college men have a propensity to make up stories. And we can look at the Cornerstone for my reaction to that. But one of the stories is that Kimball, since a lot of the chapters are fairly loose about saying the name Kimball, and pledges are associate members. And by the way, I'll say pledge a lot, but I'm the one who got Delta Chi to adopt associate member. I think that was a good move. But I'll slip a lot, more than a lot of people, because I was a pledge and say pledge, but it's associate member. But they would say the name Kimball in front of their associates, and they'd ask who that was, and they'd make up stories. He's some drunk we picked up off the street. He's you know, he did something bad, and we threw him out the front door. What, you know, making up things. But what I did then was take the excerpt from Albert T. Wilkinson's letter, where he says, and it's in the Cornerstone, I'm the guy who introduced Kimball to the fraternity. Well, if he introduced Kimball in 1890, then it couldn't be some drunk from last week. That's why I put it in the Cornerstone. I expected some flack from that, but I didn't really get any. Another thing they would do just out of the Cornerstone, they counted the number of steps in front of the headquarters, and they said the number of steps had a special meaning. So in the next edition of the Cornerstone, I erased a couple of the steps.
How about rivets?
Rivets, that was Larry Autohelm, a guy called Larry and chastised him. According to Larry, the guy was very abusive and said that Larry didn't know how to do the coat of arms. And Larry said, "What are you talking about?" And he said, "Well, everyone knows the number of rivets indicates the number of chapters, and you've got the wrong number of rivets on the coat of arms." And that's where the rivets are decorative and without meaning. It was written with Borelli's push to get that put in the ritual. Yeah, I think it's time to take it out. It's, people make a joke out of it, and it's time that we quit encouraging jokes about our stuff. The other thing that got put in by Borelli was that the white carnation is the fraternity flower and it has no other meaning. That got put into the ritual. And then people said, wait a second, it's the symbol of the Order of the White Carnation. So we had to take that saying out of the ritual. Those two sayings we're talking about, the rivets and the flower, were just put in to combat stupid stuff. The trouble is, then you look stupid. I'm trying to think of, I was trying to find ATO's membership manual. The page with the big Greek letters, that comes directly out of ATO's manual. The wide margins, where you could put marginal notes, that's ATO's manual that does that. The listing of where fraternities are founded in the chapters, that comes out of ATO's manual. The old college drawings, those come out of ATO's. The Raleigh Tavern, that's in ATO's. In the back, we have the etiquette, where the place setting and how to tie a tie. That comes out of ATO's manual. Though I added the bow tie to be classier. At some point, when you don't have as many resources as you need or other people have, you need to try and borrow some from someone else, to lift yourself up. I've said many times I had 4 main goals when I became the exec. We needed to have more chapters. We needed to have more money in the bank. We need to have better programming, even if we had to borrow some of it. And we needed to look better than what we really were. So, now the brief system is a spin-off of Pike's Modulog system. And I think our brief system is much better. Just because I borrowed an idea doesn't mean I couldn't improve it, and I improved it. So, this was the pledge manual that I had in the fall '65. It's not hardbound, you can flex it, but it is stiff. A lot of people like this AM or pledge manual. It was a pledge manual back then. They replaced it with this thing, which was not well received by the chapters. Then they went to, it's called the Delta Chi Pledge Manual. Then they went to this soft-bound Cornerstone.
That predated you.
That predated me. Richard Cotters was the editor, and one of the things I discovered is all the AMs at the pledges had to memorize who the editor of the Cornerstone was. I considered that meaningless. When I took over and became the editor of the Cornerstone, I took editor out. Even though I was the editor, I wasn't going to set it up where they had to memorize that I was the editor. And I was focused on the brief system, you know, how to do an associate member program, how to recruit, how to improve your scholarship. I thought all these were important, and I had at least one of my leadership consultants who said, our Cornerstone stinks. All the other fraternities have good-looking membership manuals, and ours sucks. And I said, well, programming matters more. And then ATO came out with their membership manual, and I thought it was, and I also said to this guy, Terry Doler from Idaho, I didn't see anyone out there that was that great until ATOs came out. Now it had some things I didn't like, and I fixed them, and I came out with our Cornerstone. And theirs was much shorter. It looked like they'd cut the bottom 2 inches off the book. And I normally would print 2 years of Cornerstones for a supply. And that allowed me to update it and improve it and still get a cost that was reasonable. Well, I printed 2 years of this guy, and we sold out in 9 months because not only did the associate members want them and required to have them, the members thought they were so great they wanted. And I realized that was another of my mistakes, thinking that the quality of the Cornerstone was not that big a deal. It was that big a deal. And I think the Cornerstone has been a wonderful addition, how it's gone, and we've tried to enhance it every year. Then I had a guy call me and tell me that I had destroyed the Cornerstone. Destroyed it. I said, what are we talking about? Well, everyone knows what I'm talking about. I said, well, I don't, tell me. And I said, you know, I don't change it that much. How could I destroy it? And he said, well, everyone knows that in the Cornerstone, see, I think I've got an old enough one to do it. The first word is the. And the last word, if I can get to it, group. And he said, the group. That means the group is important. You gotta be kidding. Because the next issue, the group comes out of the risk management policy, and FIPG changed the last paragraph, and group was no longer the last word. So that was my fault. Interesting. The other thing, and I emphasized it when I read the original preamble, and if you look in our Constitution, you'll notice a lot of people don't realize what the name of our fraternity is. And the answer is the Delta Chi fraternity. In George Knoll's handwriting in the original preamble, I can get to it. It's not there. He writes the Delta Chi fraternity and capitalizes the. Another thing that's interesting here, this is book number 1 of this set, and there are cards of membership cards, and then you go and then there's pages of membership, and what these are is the precursor to, and right there is Frederick Bagley. It's our PR farms in their early stages. And if you look, I can get to it. Here is Myron McKee Crandall's PR farm. And the interesting thing here is his PR number is 108. Now, why would a founder be 108? And if I go further, I can find John Milton Gorham at 153. There's John Gorham at 153. Why? In my opinion, at some point, someone at the chapter level, I believe, decided we should have PR farms, and we should ask our members, who are your parents, what's their address, just different personal information, what's your major, law, what's your date of birth, etc., etc. And once they started doing PR farms, they had to go back and send blanks to the founders and other people who had already been initiated and hadn't filled out a PR farm and say, would you fill out this PR farm for us? And that's why the founders are up in the hundreds, filling out PR farms, which are a new thing. Oh, and by the way, there's John Francis Tucker, who started the NYU chapter. So there's amazing things in these books. There's the original ritual, which I can't show you. Nothing movable or immovable, so I can't show you that. It'd be one of those things. I'm trying to see if I can find something else.
Would you talk about the naming a little bit and the doodles?
What naming?
Go a couple more, just some of the scratching and some of the potential possible names for the fraternity.
They talked about, you see scratches like this. It looks like Delta Tau Omega. And people wonder, did we consider that as the fraternity's name? Here's an interesting thing. I always thought that was an interesting page.
Whose name is on the top?
That in pencil, I've asked many people, what's that say? And they don't know. And then you explain it to them. It's M. Crandall.
So where were these records? Because again, before having a headquarters, they would have just been either in a personal collection or passed between officer to officer prior to Clinton and...
Presumptively, both. Well, here's something that I think is really interesting, because the question is, did we start Delta Chi with the idea of it just being a single chapter, or did we from the beginning plan an international or at least national organization? And people point at this piece of paper to say it's clear we thought of an international or national organization. And I don't think so. Can you focus and get that captured?
Right.
Got it? Okay. Now, here's what it says. October 13th, 1890. And by the way, Albert Sollard Barnes provided this, and he said, looking at the original minutes from October 13th, 1890, I see blah, blah, blah. You know, now in my possession. He's written that someplace. Well, here's what it says. October 13th, 1890, the Constitution, adopted by a via voice vote. I don't know what that means. Crandall, Barnes, Gorham, Sullivan, Stevens, Flanner, Potter. Then it uses secret titles I can't repeat. It basically says Barnes is the C and Stillman is the D. It talks with blah, blah, blah. But here's what I think is interesting. It's written in pencil, okay, but the names of the people in the meeting: Crandall, Barnes, then Gorham, and he spells Gorham G-H-O-R-E-M. That's not how you spell Gorham's name. Then he has Stevens, S-T-E-V-E-N-S. Stevens spelled his name with a P-H, not a V. Then he has Flanner, and Flannery spells it different. Now, if you only have like 10 Pledge Brothers, do you think you know how to spell their names? In my opinion, you know how to spell their names. Why would he not be able to spell their names? The other thing is you need to realize the number of students in the Cornell Law School in the fall of '90 was probably less than 100 in the whole law school. So if there's 100 people and you're taking classes with them and you're socializing with them, to me, you wouldn't have that many names misspelled. Maybe one. So I think this is Barnes sitting down as an older man, reconstructing what he would then think the minutes might read like. And I don't think that proves anything. It certainly doesn't prove that we intended from the beginning. Oh, and the other thing in there somewhere, it says charter granted to Cornell. No, I don't see it. Well, that's interesting stuff. These minutes, and then after George Knoll stops as the secretary. You get it, if I can find it now. It says here, and no big deal, but what it says is during the administration of the next secretary, no minutes were put in this book or any other I can find. And then John Francis Tucker takes over after this guy, who's Travis, was that his name? Yeah. We all have seen that in our own chapter, where certain officers do a great job and others not so much. So sitting, here we are in the headquarters among all this history. And I've looked at a lot of it, but in some ways, I've more than scratched the surface, but not much more. And I'm sitting here saying, we're just letting it sit here. How long would it take for someone to go through all this and figure things out? And I'm saying it'd take a while. I figured some things out. Like the flat forehead syndrome, that one space in the minute. I understood what that space meant. I've said to many people, I said it to fieldmen in training. I'll tell you when you're a good field man. It's when you hear what the chapters are not telling you. Then you're a good field man. So there's things that aren't being said that you have to read into some of this. Like reading what I did on Albert Sollard Barnes' minutes, original minutes from October 13, 1890. I wonder if we could do a carbon testing on that paper and find out how old it is. I doubt if it's 1890. But I don't know. And the impact on our chapters, a lot of people, what did National do for us this year? Well, it did this. It did this. It did this. And it did this. And it impacts you. I've said to chapters who questioned why National, I said, and I'll be in their house, and I'll point at the coat of arms on the wall, and whose coat of arms is that? And the answer is, it's Nationals. I don't like the word Nationals, but I'll use it at this point. What I preferred I told the fieldmen, don't use Nationals, use Delta Chi fraternity. And when you talk about us, when you talk about the chapter, you talk about the chapter, or you talk about the North-South chapter. But we are Delta Chi fraternity. And you're using Delta Chi fraternity's coat of arms, you are using Delta Chi's name. What fraternity are you in? Delta Chi? Yeah. That's a service we provide. We protect that name. We have it trademarked. We fight people that try and use it. Okay? How about the badge? You wearing a badge? Do you have a cornerstone? When you initiate someone, what ritual are you using? When you're pledging someone, what associate member ceremony are you using? You're using Delta Chi's associate member ceremony. You're using Delta Chi's ritual. So don't say we don't, don't ask, what have we done for you today? We have done lots, and we do things all the time. Do we fail on occasion? Do we trip up once in a while? More than I care to admit. But don't blame us for a lack of effort, because we're trying. So,
Could you talk a little bit about the history book project you put together and the lack of kind of a documented history that we had prior to that?
one of the things I had always wanted to do was write a history of Delta Chi. And some of the people watching this realize I have written what I call historical tidbits. Thank you. And I've written like 73 of them, taking snippets of Delta Chi's history and writing them up and sending them out. But what I really wanted to do and felt I was the best guy to do it was write a history book of Delta Chi. And I was running out of time. You know, a lot of times I'll do something like this Cornerstone and ask myself, why did it take me 20-some years to get to this? And the answer is because I was doing something else that needed to be done. So many things to do, and I can only do so much. But one of the things I always wanted to do was write a book on Delta Chi's history. I finally realized I needed someone to help me do that. And I contacted a company that did history books for organizations. Some of the organizations you got, why would you do a history book on the local golf country club? You know, maybe someone cares that much. You know, I have a hard time on that one. But certainly a fraternity. I contacted this firm. They had a woman that they thought would do a good job. And I talked to her. And I said, okay, I was impressed with what she had to say. And she did the history book for Delta Chi. I think some of you recognize Hands Across the Centuries, coming from Monroe Marsh Sweetland, and when he said that to John Trussell. But for the sake of this taping, I need to explain it, I believe. At a Delta Chi event, Monroe Marsh Sweetland, who was an older man at the time, shook hands with John Trussell, Cornell 27, and said to John, who I'd met, that at some point in the future, John would be an old man talking to young Delta Chi's like he is now, and shaking their hands. And he said, I want you to say to them that you shook the hand of a founder, Monroe Marsh Sweetland. And it's sort of a hand across the century, singular. And that handshake comes from me, Monroe Marsh Sweetland. Now it's centuries because we've crossed another century mark. And so she used that. You know, I'd tell her stories and she'd pick up on them, write them down, and add them to the book. She was very good. Throughout the book, there are things that she read or heard, she caught and put into the book. This book I always said what I wanted to be able to, I'd seen other books of histories of fraternities and sororities that looked like textbooks. They were just nothing but print. Not interesting at all. But this, I said, I wanted a, what I call a coffee table book. Look at the photos flashing by. By the way, there she is, Annie Devoy. And I can get to it. There's a full-page photo of Kevin Costner. Oh, and there's Marge Lee. There's Ashton Kutcher. All sorts of people are in this book. There's a tally-ho at the 1907 convention. There's the 1900 chapter house that burned, and John Lonergan, jumping out of that window down to the basement level, died from his injuries. His mother and sister managed to come to his bedside in the hospital and be there as he passed. That's in here. Stories about Delta Chi. I love that photo of the Stanford 15 convention. An old 1911 convention banquet. Well, anyhow, there's a Delta Chi and his date at a formal. Wouldn't it be neat if you bought the book and saw you and your wife in the photo? Hopefully his wife. Kansas had a Tom Jones party